So that's how Atlanta Dispatch got started.
That's fascinating. And it's so, it's so great to hear that this community really rallied around you, which is what one of the things I tell all my friends, who don't work in trucking and logistics, just how supportive this community really is. And so I think the fact that they were able to support you on your journey, I think you speak a lot for so many right now in the industry who are really sort of flexing their entrepreneurial muscle, so to speak. Welcome to Stream, a trucktractortrailer.com production. My name is Zach Miller. I'm your host, and I'm really excited today to be joined by Jorie Myers, who is the owner of Atlanta Dispatch. Jorie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you so much, brother. I'm very excited to be here, and I appreciate the time.
Of course, anytime. And so let's sort of get into this. How long has Atlanta Dispatch been in business? And tell us the story. When did you start it? Why did you start it? And sort of where are you guys sitting right now?
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on and for the question. So Atlanta Dispatch was started back in January of 2021. And essentially, it was born out of my need to be able to control my destiny financially. Had moved in with my then girlfriend, now wife, and the pandemic had happened, and the job that I had before seemed like it might have gotten a little shaky in the sense of I was dispatching for a corporation. I was dispatching 13 of the best drivers you can imagine, very professional bunch. Never an issue. Everybody did exactly what they needed to do, what you would want a company driver to do. And when the pandemic hit, what was that, March 2020, they got fired. Yeah, they got fired within like 2 weeks. And, and like I said, very professional, some of the greatest group of guys and gals I had ever met. And with them being fired, me as their dispatcher, I said, man, well, I got to be able to protect my income, the way that I'm paying bills and, trying to create a life over here. And with that came, just a lot of just focused energy, concentration as to what can I do to create streams of income outside of a corporate environment. And, with that, I was introduced to an app called Clubhouse. If you guys have heard of it.
I remember Clubhouse. I remember using Clubhouse in the beginning of the pandemic, actually. Yeah.
Exactly. So I guess that's when it was like, it caught like wildfire. And, thankfully I was in a spot to be able to be an early adopter and create a group that was geared towards transportation and logistics. That's the name of the group on Clubhouse. We've had a good amount of press about it, about 27,000 members to date. And, the whole point was just being able to connect with like-minded individuals. And due to the pandemic happening at that time, there were a lot of folks saying, I need to transition to being an entrepreneur. And, the culture said, you know what? We're going to share our experiences and our gain. And, it was through that platform that I was blessed enough to be able to meet enough people who were doing dispatching as entrepreneurs versus, under a corporation. And I learned from those individuals. And with that, I got all the tools that I needed to start my own company. And again, I had been dispatching for a couple of years. So I knew the fundamentals. It was more so what were the nuanced things I needed to learn to do it as an entrepreneur. And once I got those, I was backed by the industry. A lot of people supported me, and it was time to, launch. So that's how Atlanta Dispatch got started.
That's fascinating. And it's so it's so great to hear that this community really rallied around you, which is what one of the things I tell all my friends, who don't work in trucking and logistics, just how supportive this community really is. And so I think the fact that they were able to support you on your journey, I think you speak a lot for so many right now in the industry who are really sort of flexing their entrepreneurial muscle, so to speak. I agree with you. I think for so many people, for so many reasons, the pandemic supercharged that. And we're seeing this sort of new wave of partially tech entrepreneurs, partially just, maybe more old school type entrepreneurs in the trucking, transportation, and logistics space than certainly, than I've ever seen before. And I grew up in the industry. So it's a really interesting time, I think, with that combination of entrepreneurship and trucking transportation.
Agreed. I agree with you there, man. And I think that the beauty in it is that people are willing to collaborate now. I don't know if it was the pandemic or just, our culture is getting away from a mindset of scarcity, but now people are a lot more willing to build that relationship with you and show you how to do it versus, keeping those walls up. So I'm just very grateful to have entered the industry when I did.
And I think that's something that's also relatively new, especially in the dispatching part of the industry. Of course, dispatchers always had to build and maintain those relationships, in order to succeed in that particular field. But it was a very, how do I say this? It was more siloed. There wasn't a whole lot of collaboration amongst dispatchers, and there was a lot of distrust, I think, with a lot of the drivers and dispatch. So the fact that I think those walls are starting to come down, I think the fact that there are dispatchers like yourself that really do care about those relationships and care about those drivers. I mean, just at the onset of this interview, you mentioned the drivers you worked with multiple times and, how professional they are and testament to their hard work. And I think that mentality in dispatch, thankfully, is really starting to change. And I think that's going to have really interesting positive developments for the economy moving forward.
Agreed. Yeah, being as how I learned in a corporate environment, I was in a spot where transparency was everything in the first place. There was no secrets. If I booked a load, the driver understood that I was putting their interests first, their safety first. And, we had our goals. We needed to hit a certain bottom line. But as long as we kept the safety of the driver first, everything flows smoothly from there. So taking that, that premise, that mindset and applying it to independent drivers, owner operators, it was a no-brainer. I wanted to make sure just everything was transparent and, everyone knew what was going on. Even to this day, my biggest task is educating people, making sure that, that people don't feel as though there's anything that's trying to, like, any quick plays. No, we're here to do a job, be very, very professional while we do it. And especially in light of the FMCSA coming with the ruling in November regarding, how dispatch companies can operate. I think it's very, very important to do as much dialogue now as you really can, and I take every opportunity that I can to talk about, just dispatching the services, the transparency that the professional dispatchers are out here using.
And I think as a whole, we're seeing a lot for drivers, dispatch, many in the industry really are starting to show the world, certainly the U.S. economy, that this is profession. These are professional people in professional careers and should be treated as such. I am curious though, for the owner operators, the clients of Atlanta Dispatch, about how large is the average fleet that you deal with? Is it mostly just like single truck owner operators? Are there a couple of small fleets in there? What's the size you usually deal with?
If I had to average it, I'll say per MC, there are 2 units.
Okay.
But it just depends on where you want to be in the market. There are those owner operators that only have their own, just one truck show, which is very nice. Or, as a dispatch agency, you can focus more on the fleets that have, 5, 6, 10 units. It just depends on when you feel like your skill sets are and how strong your relationships are with the freight opportunities, because the dispatch agency is really, it's kind of as good as their proximity of good freight, consistent freight. So, it just depends on where your strengths lie. I technically like more of the 4 to 5, and I'll advertise more to the 5 to 10 truck carrier, just to leverage my network. So yeah, it just depends on where you are, but my average right now is about 2 trucks per MC.
Awesome. And what are you seeing in the market right now? Like, because I know there's a lot of news. We know about the inflation numbers. There's a lot of, I would say, conflicting reports about what the holiday shopping season is going to look like. Obviously, we don't know it until we're there, but dispatch and trucking is going to be at the forefront of it, and they'll be able to know before everybody else. So what are you seeing in the market right now?
Okay, so I use a lot of relationships, right? So the relationships that I've garnered and poured into over the last couple of years, those are pretty much the sources where I get the majority of my freight. So my rates have been more insulated. They haven't changed too much, but I do have the opportunity to host a weekly, taping podcast with Freightway Sonar team. And, each time we're talking about the market and the places where you should position your trucks to take advantage of opportunities. And a consistent question I ask is, or a lane that I look at, is Atlanta to Philadelphia on the drive in. And I'll say that, for Q1, it was probably closer to about 380 a mile, something great. And, since then, it's probably declined about 20%. So, so in Q2 and going into towards the end of Q3, it's definitely declined a good amount. But what do I see as far as the holiday season? I think that we're going to experience some higher rates, and I'm excited about those higher rates for the owner operators and small fleet owners who have been impacted by the higher fuel costs. Earlier in the year, that was the biggest thing that I noticed with my carriers, was just the fact that although the rates that I was even getting through my relationships were astronomically higher than what was advertised on the load boards, fuel was still, cutting in a huge percentage of their margin. So, we're in a spot where we're going to say, well, the rates might not be terrible, but just the fact that costs are up, are they going to really be able to see the margin that they need to see?
Yeah, well said. And seriously, and I remember that too, when the fuel prices first really jumped. I mean, we were hearing stories about these owner operators that had to take out working capital loans just to buy fuel. I mean, you talk about the mark of a disaster right there. So it's good that things are starting to look a little bit better, look a little bit more stable. You mentioned earlier about how important it is to you to educate, to advise. You mentioned your spot with FreightWaves, but you also have a book coming out soon.
I do. Thank you. Yeah, I have a book coming out just because, traditionally, or once I understood that dispatching was something that can be done as an entrepreneur, it's kind of like you see a car, you bought that car, and now you see that car everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was just like, oh, yeah, that's a dispatcher. And then you see some of these dispatchers, they have courses. So for interested parties who want to become dispatchers, they have a course. And, some of those courses were like a weekend thing, maybe 4 hours on a Saturday. And, I've attended many of these courses, and just because I had dispatched already for a couple of years, I realized I was like, man, my learning curve took me a long time to get all the things that had to happen and when they needed to happen. And, I was fortunate enough to learn, with a corporation, so I could absorb, I could get this over time. I realized that maybe those 4-hour interval training classes, some of those fundamentals might not be able to get discussed at the length in which, you might want to be able to discuss those. So, this book right here is more so something to have in advance of taking a course. That way you have the fundamentals on lock, and now when you are speaking or you're in one of those courses, you can get very, very granular on techniques and how to do something versus, drinking from the fire hydrant, which is dispatching and, the FMCSA's regulations and all the things that come with it. It's just a lot. So, insurance, you can't, it's just so much.
I know that's a big one. I mean, and I was actually, earlier this week, I was at a conference, and yeah, just like talk all the issues that they talk about, from the rising costs, the little, you think it's a little thing, but it's not. It has these massive impacts. Yeah, it's wild, and that's why it's awesome that you're working on that, to really have that information in one single place that people can access as they need it. It's a fantastic thing.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. And, prayerfully, that ruling for the FMCSA in November is really going to determine a lot. But the book is going to be there in Q4. So prayerfully, it can help a lot of people, and people still see independent dispatching as a good opportunity after that ruling.
Outstanding. Somebody wants to get in touch with you, watch your podcast, work with Atlanta Dispatch. How do they go about doing that?
Oh, right. So to listen to the podcast, it's streaming on Spotify, Apple, all streaming platforms, really. So it's transportation and logistics, very straightforward. I want it to be very Googleable. Okay. And if you wanted to go directly to the website, is transportationandlogistics.club, spelled all the way out, transportationandlogistics.club. You can follow us on Instagram, transportation and logistics, and even TikTok, transportation.logistics. As far as Atlanta Dispatch, that's atlantadispatch.org, and Atlanta Dispatch on social. So we're here, brother. Thank you so much again for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for hopping on. Really informative, really interesting stuff. And again, I think just being in that entrepreneurial mindset, seeing some of the changes to dispatching, it's important, and it's important that people understand what's going on in the industry. So thank you for taking the time and talking to us today.
Definitely. I'm here, and thank you.
If you guys like the content you see, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Stream.